G'day folks, I'm Mark Rudin, this is Nomad Boatbuilding, and we are working on the 2.4 meter project. Now today we're going to get onto the subject of flotation. Now the rules of this particular sailing class dictate that I have to have fixed flotation and not tanks. It's got to be solid foam flotation. Now I hate that I have to do this because it means I've got to put a bunch of stuff into a void, and then you gotta seal that up, and then guaranteed somewhere down the road some water is going to get in there and it's going to be a bit of a nightmare, and it makes me crazy that I have to do it. But I totally understand it's a part of the rules and it's for safety, and safety is very, very important. Anyhow, the natural tendency in this case is to use pour-in-place urethane foam. So it's a two-part foam. You get a catalyst, you get a resin, you mix them together, and then it goes everywhere. And that's the problem. It is kind of unpredictable, and it is super messy, and if it starts going everywhere, there's nothing you can do to stop it. You just gotta let it go. And it gives me the willies to think about pouring a bunch of this stuff into the boat. So yes, we could mix it in small batches and pour it in a little at a time, but we really want to fill this thing right to the brim, and that means at some point you're getting right near the top, and you know what's going to happen with that last layer. Is it going to start spewing out and going down the sides of the boat, and that would be super ugly. Anyhow, there's a bunch of reasons we decided that we did not want to use that stuff. It's not cheap, and you got to buy a certain volume just to get started with, and I can't remember exactly if the volume we had to buy is maybe just barely enough, or maybe it's just a whole bunch too much. I don't remember because it's been a while since we hit this part of the build, and regardless, what we decided to do was use residential blue styrofoam bats or panels. And we decided to do that because it's actually pretty nice stuff. It's very rigid, very structural. It's closed cell foam, and it has a really good track record. We know that it resists taking on water for a hell of a long time, more so than the pour-in-place stuff, which has got a terrible reputation for becoming waterlogged eventually. So what we decided to do is we're going to use a bunch of that. We're going to cut little cookies of it, fit it to the hull roughly, and then we're going to use spray foam, just your off the shelf, out of the can spray foam that you would use around windows and doors and that sort of thing. And I know this is a bit, it might seem a bit jippy, and it's going to look a bit messy and very non-professional, but you know what, it's going to work well, and it's relatively cost effective. In fact, it's cheaper than using the pour-in-place foam. It's going to take a little more time to do it, maybe, but it's much more controllable, and in the end, once these panels are all fixed in place, there is some little avenues for water to drain through. So if water gets in there, there's an ability for it to pass through that flotation down to the bottom, and remember we put a little drain plug in there so that it can get out. So we've created a very non-destructive way of getting water out of there in the future should it get in there. And if you needed to provide a little more ventilation to allow that water to sort of circulate through and air to circulate through, you could always remove the inspection hatches and even drill a few little holes in through that flotation so that air can move in and then down through and get that water out of there. So that's what we're going to do. I almost don't want to show this because it's a bit... What are you going to do, eh? All right, let's get to work. Okay, so we're fitting foam blocking into the forward end of our boat. And so I'm going to use this little pattern that we made up. And this was obviously from doing our bulkhead, and it's just going to help us to sort of get started. And the idea is I'm going to fit these little billets of foam into the boat, stacking one behind the next, and using the spray foam to fill in around the edges, and I'll probably use a spray adhesive to bond the individual pieces together. So I think this is going to do a pretty good job, and I already did the back end and it worked out okay. I haven't foamed it in yet, but at least doing the billets was relatively fast. So we're going to do that. So this is, right now this is going to fit the hull snugly, and I don't want that. I actually want it to fit loosely. I want somewhere around an inch around the outside, maybe a bit less, just enough to be able to get my gun in there and foam in around it and have it expand. And then we'll use one billet to shape the next billet. So if I just eyeball this right now, and I'm going to pull it back just a little ways, enough, obviously, so that I can get the foam gun into the hull and lock it in place using the minimum amount of spray foam. And I'm just going to set a constant bevel that's going to sort of nominally match the sides of the boat. And of course, this is going to rise up above the shear line. We'll fit the deck beams in after the foam's in place, and then we'll try and do a skim coat of spray foam over top if we can. So that's the plan. Fingers crossed that it works. So we'll do all our cutting on the bandsaw. I've already picked up a bevel from my boat for the sort of the average, or at least the most extreme angle that's on the inside. And there we go. So I still need to trim off this little flange, but I won't worry about that for the moment. We'll go pop this into the boat and see how it looks. Okay, so here we go. Here's our first foam billet. And that fit is just fine. Now I'm not worried about trying to make any sort of a nice fit here, obviously, because we're going to foam it in place. But one thing I want to point out is, while this fits pretty good, there's an issue I want to address ahead of time. And that is, well, we're going to do everything we can to make sure water doesn't get in here. There's always the chance that water does get in here. And so to mitigate that, I have added a drain. However, if this is all full of sprayed in foam, water that gets in may not get down to that very easily. And so I want to try and fix that situation. And the way I'm going to do it is I am going to provide a path to that drain hole. And I'm just going to use this pipe insulation. And it's got this, you know, self-adhesive little strip on the edges. So I'm going to glue that down and create a trough that goes right to there, and we'll put a few notches in along the edge so that any water that does get in and gets past this foam, like it'll get between the billets perhaps, has a chance of making its way out. That's the goal. And this is basically all we're going to do is create a small path, a small air cavity. Now, I don't know if that's a good idea or a terrible idea, to be totally honest. But, I mean, this is as light as the rest of the foam, so that should be fine. And leaving a little air pocket in here, I don't think is a big deal. So let's try and do exactly that. Now, I suppose one question is, how do we create channels for that water to get through? And, I don't exactly know. Maybe we'll just try popping a few holes in here with an awl or something, just so that, yeah, we'll do that. I also want this to help sort of suspend these billets up off the bottom so that I can actually start the spray process someplace. Okay, so here's what we do. And this is turning into a terrible idea. Okay, I don't like it. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to slice this in half. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I've split this in half. I think this might be a better way to go. There we go. We'll just get one side tagged down there. There we are, that's better. So we'll just leave that free floating. Just going to take my knife and pop a few holes in here along the way. So now with that in there, there we go. See, that's gonna sit there, and that's gonna give me something that's gonna give me somewhere I can foam in underneath here effectively, and that was one of the goals that I had. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now of course there's all these voids back here that need to get dealt with, and I already figured out a way to do that. And this first billet, I think I'm just gonna split it into like 3 pieces so that I can get, like, say, the center piece in, and I can get my gun in behind there and foam in behind it. Does that make any sense? Or maybe what I really need to do is I need to just try and force a layer of foam onto here and then drop this in place. I don't know. I really wish I had a better solution for this. Or maybe I should split it this way. Do a small piece. Yeah, I can get my gun in there and then shove it in place and then do the one on top of it. That'll probably work best, because then I can just tip it back and foam it in that way. Yeah, we'll do that. So for now I'm going to leave it alone. Of course, I've got the deck crown here. I don't want a ton of material poking up above, so we'll just trace across the deck beam here and trim off a little bit. I want to leave just enough to scrub it down. And I guess we're going to need a different angle, so maybe I'll set the other bandsaw up with this angle. There we go. All right, that looks good. So I'm going to get some more foam, and we'll just start making billets one after the other and just drop those in there and dry fit them all.
With a reasonable fit on my first billet, I'll just chase around the narrower side of it to mark the shape of my second billet, and so on. As we move forward, the hull is going to change shape a little bit, and we'll just adjust the angle on the bandsaw to accommodate that. My workshop is tight on elbow room at the best of times, so despite being lightweight, these styrofoam panels are awkward to work with in my shop. So I'm going to knock them down to smaller pieces with my circular saw before cutting them on the bandsaw. Whenever working with styrofoam on machinery, you need to be extra cautious. It might seem like it's just like cutting butter, but this stuff can really bind sometimes in ways that you don't expect, so you really should take your time and be very careful about what you're doing and keep good control of your materials as you go. I've had more unexpected kickbacks on my table saw cutting foams than I have with any hardwoods. And it can be equally, if not more, dangerous on a bandsaw if you've got your blade guide set too high. So always be very cautious and take your time with these things. Our deck camber pattern comes to help us out, marking the tops of these billets, and having a second bandsaw set up with the rake of the shear certainly helps to save a few steps and make this job go a little bit faster.
I kind of figure this is one of those ideas that maybe it's just kind of like inert, hopefully. You see, the optimist would say, there's no way water's ever getting in here, this is a waste of time. And then the pessimist would say, it's going to fill up with water. We shouldn't be doing this at all. And it leaves me kind of in the middle between the two, trying to decide whether it's a good idea or a terrible idea, and I really don't know. I really don't know. But we'll just keep following this line of thinking. The one thing this foam is doing, though, is it's keeping my little styrofoam billets elevated off the bottom so that I can foam in underneath them. So at the very least, there's, you know, that practical purpose for them. So from that perspective, I don't think it's the worst idea. Okay, so there we go. That looks pretty good. I want to make a point of weighing in my billets before I drop them in there, but just for the heck of it, I'll drop this in and have a look at it. Yeah, that looks good. I'm going to go with that plan, or I split this first one. I guess I'll split it down horizontally at about the same spacing as these ribs down here. That sort of makes sense to me. So if I measure these out, we're at 9, 14, and 19. 9, roughly 14, and 19. Something like that. I'll grab a straight edge and mark those out properly. I got to think about all the other things that I have to consider before I go and start foaming this in. Taping off. I'm going to tape off everywhere that the foam should not go, because I do not want that stuff spewing out all over the place. Got to tape off, cover up my little inspection hatches. Got to weigh all of this foam. I have to make sure I've got slots for the deck beams. I know I got to cut there. I got to do that up forward. Make sure there's room above in the foam for the deck beams, because I don't want to have to try and whittle that out later. That seems like a pain. Well, I could probably just take a router in there and just go zip. I've taped off everywhere that I don't want foam to go. When I get to it, I'm going to be fitting my deck beams in, the last deck beams. Not sure if I'll just like wait till later on or fit them in the middle, but we'll see how things progress. So anyway, I'm prepared for that. Oh, man, I've had so much anxiety about this particular little element. There goes nothing. So that's supposed to sit down there like so. Let's see. I'll be using a couple different kinds of foam on this project. The one you see me using here is a high expansion foam, and I'll just be using that in areas that are hard to reach. I would use this for the whole project, except I could only get small cans of it with the little plastic applicator wand, which is really hard to use, and I could only find 2 or 3 cans of it locally. So for the rest of this, I'll be using a red crack and gap filler for around windows and doors, and for that I have a professional application gun, which is far easier to use. First piece. I think I want to get my second piece in fairly quickly. Oh, that feels better. Given that a spritzing of adhesive. suppose this is going a little differently than I expected, but it seems to be going okay. It is an odd thing to try and do, I'll tell you that much. So the big gun, even though it puts out a smaller jet, is easier to control. These little guys really feel like they've got very little going on inside of them. Go this one I thought we'd try it, doing it a little bit different. If I'm careful to make sure my tip is touching, I can get it to stick to surfaces. Otherwise, it just wants to peel right off, as you saw just there. So that, because the idea is that this is all going to expand over the next little while. There we go. So just feed that in there. Just realized when I cut these, I hadn't put these little drainage, fitted these foam tubes. So now my deck, I'm gonna have to hold off on my deck beam. I'm gonna have to cut my deck beam slots deeper, which I wasn't thinking about. Oh well. There's one. There's two. I'm just going to hold back from my shear line a bit for a while. I want to just make sure everything is filling up properly. Okay, well, last one that I need to load. All right, here we go. Finish her off. I'm just kind of giving these a top off. All right, I got one last task, and that's to foam in around the deck beam. So I glued these in with epoxy. I wanted to make sure it was set before I put any foam in around them, because all of a sudden I realized the foam could suddenly push them right out of position. Okay, so here we go. Funny how you can see these little bits that came squirreling out like an hour or so later. It's weird stuff to work with. Okay, well, we're done. Looks like a bit of a horror show. But, well, what the hell. So, tomorrow we'll figure out a way to clean all of this off, skim it down. I think it'll fare off pretty easily. Probably kind of get my big disc sander going and try and take the worst of it off, and then we'll finish off with the deck crown sanding board. I'll put some really coarse grit, some 36 grit on there, and that should lick it down pretty fast actually. And we'll make as much of this ugly go away as possible. And then it's all said and done, it's all buried under a deck forevermore. All right, I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking the same thing. If I'd walked into the room just now, I would look at this and say, who is the idiot that made this mess? Well, I know it looks terrible, but you know what? It's going to work out just fine. And this is, you know, a little bit of this project we're doing in the spirit of DIY. What kind of things can we do on the lower tech end of the spectrum to get this project done? And I think this worked out pretty good. You know, some of the advantages here, it was not very expensive to do this. We went through, what, like 6 cans of the foam insulation, plus like 4 sheets of the styrofoam. I have to figure out what that was worth, but the cost of getting the pour-in-place foam was going to be up there. It was going to be about $300 or something for the couple cans of material. One of the more important details is I know we actually saved some weight. Pour-in-place foam weighs in at about 2 pounds per cubic foot, and there is about a little over 10 cubic feet in here. I think it's 10.2 or something like that in terms of these two areas that we filled. That's 20 some odd pounds. Well, I crunched the numbers on what we did here, and we came in at approximately, I haven't weighed out the waste of course, but we came in at about 16 pounds. So we saved 4 pounds, which is not insignificant on a little boat like this. So I think from that perspective it was worthwhile, because right now all we've got to worry about is trying to clean all of this up. Maybe we'll try my big orbital sander, that might do it. I could probably get by with a belt sander to sort of take it down. I want to get it to within about, you know, 1/8 of an inch of our final marks, and then finish it off just with our duck crown sanding board, because that's going to give us our most accurate result. And I could probably even take a handsaw and kind of slice a lot of this off. I might even try that first, just to get rid of the worst of it. course, down here in the sunken deck area, that's going to be kind of impossible to do. So I don't know what we're going to do over there, but we'll figure it out when we get to it. Ooh, gas escaping. Interesting. Okay, well, I think what I'm going to do, we'll skim this off and we'll see if there's any excretions before I move ahead. All right. Stop rolling around. Okay, so this is working pretty good with the sanding disc, but it's a bit hard to judge what I'm doing. So what I'm doing right now is I'm taking my saw and I'm just cutting down until I hit the tops of my, my deck beams in here, just to give myself some references. It's a bit hard to get this thing rolling, but I figure if I can get myself a few spots that I can judge from, I'll get this done fairly quickly. Of course, what I don't want to do is go overboard. That's the worst thing. I don't want a hollow there, and it'll only get filled with epoxy or something heavy. There, see? Just here, listen for those scratches, and I'm going to have to try and do the same thing back here, but it's just a little tougher because I got less only got a tiny little ledge back there to work with, so. I might have to get fairly creative as to how to get right into the nooks and crannies at the ends here. Okay, well that looks pretty darn good, I think. I can't complain about that. I mean, I would love it if all these little voids were not there, but they're really inconsequential. And I think this is nice and flat now. Yeah, that looks good. Fantastic. Okay, that's going to go great. Get all that junk out of there, and then we're ready to fit the panel. But of course, I got to finish off fairing out the other decks first. Okay, what can I say? The sort of neat and tidy anal retentive part of me hates that we went down this road, but on the other hand, we got the job done, and I am confident that it's going to be as good a flotation system as the pour-in-place foam, and I'm much more confident that there are going to be no ugly hiccups like having that foam shrink back and deform the hull, or continue to expand and deform the hull, or all these other little things that were certainly a huge worry about using the pour-in-place stuff. Another advantage to this is when I crunched the numbers at the end, we actually saved weight. Now, using this blue styrofoam and the cracking gap filler foam, it actually weighed in at about 15 pounds for the whole thing. So we saved at least 5 pounds worth of weight, which is not insignificant in this particular boat. So it was worth it for that point alone. Okay, folks, that's it for today. Come back next time. And I don't know what we're going to do. I'm never sure until I start editing the next video what the next video is going to be. So you'll find out when I figure it out. As always, thank you all for watching. Thank everybody who helps support these videos over on Patreon. If you can help us out there, really appreciate that. Link in the corner, down in the description. And other than that, take her easy.